One of the reasons you went into documentary film is to tell true stories, and that often true stories are like more interesting and unpredictable than fiction. Well, at the moment, there's like a trend in Hollywood to talk about like true stories from like the early 2000s, like The Big Short, Spotlight, Sully. I guess Snowden's more of a biopic, but Deepwater Horizon, like they're all coming out now, and they're all kind of like fiction documentaries. So do you think that will take away from the genre of documentary, or do you think it's a good thing that it's fiction but also a mixture of non-fiction?
Personally, I just think it's because Hollywood realizes that they've run through all of their their old, the old standby ideas of boy meets girl and everything they can think of. The vaudeville history of Hollywood has kind of been exhausted in a way. They've made and remade the same stories again and again, and they've just discovered that documentary is really where it's at, and they're just making documentaries in the way that Hollywood makes films.
And what would you rather see? Man on Wire, the documentary about Philippe Petit, who crossed the World Trade Center towers, or the fiction film by Robert Zemeckis? I didn't see the fiction film, but I would choose Man on Wire every time.
I didn't see it either, and I'd make the same choice.
Yeah. They'll soon buy the remake rights. They'll soon buy the remake rights of the documentary. Okay.
By the way, that is a source of income for documentary filmmakers. I was once lucky enough where a Hollywood people, and it's become very difficult to make money. But once in a while, somebody will buy the rights to take your documentary and turn it into fiction. And I bet you 9 times out of 10, the documentary is more interesting. Oh, that was it was called The Battle Over Citizen Kane, and it was the first time I was lucky enough to be nominated for an Oscar, and it was a very 20 years ago, and it was traditionally told a historical film with people seated, talking heads, and with narration, but I think it was very well done, and Ridley Scott's company paid a substantial sum to turn it into an HBO fictional film, which was pretty bad.
Good. Another question? So.
Hi, I'm Renee. I wonder, when you mentioned that when you're in a foreign country, how long does it take for you to find a story, or how do you know where you can find a story while you're completely new in the country or city?
In the case of Afghanistan, I guess Google Earth is your friend. First you're looking at locations, and before you even go there, you can sort of get the layout of a place, and so you can even, if it's been, sometimes you can even really pick a location in a city just by kind of having a good eye for satellite photography and sort of knowing what kind of neighborhood you're looking for to work in. I go first by location and then by character, usually. And also I'm looking for particular kind of scenarios which are going to give me access to a particular social scenario, something that's filmable. Since Iran, I knew I was looking for a situation like a school or a hospital or an orphanage, something where there's a repeating group of people who are always there, working there, or they're studying there, or whatever it is, or they live there, and yet it's not necessarily, because it's the Muslim world and it's really delicate to film inside someone's house, for example, and it's just not something that you can do day after day for years at a time. You need something where you're going to have access to ordinary people, and it's going to be, it's not going to be on the street. It's going to be some enclosed space with multiple characters, and there's a kind of system of rules. So, I got to Afghanistan and I looked at 8 different schools. I looked at 3 different hospitals and the largest government orphanage. And I eventually decided on one of the schools. It took 6 months.
I didn't know that James searched stuff on Google Earth before he picked his locations, but I'm not surprised. He and I belong to the same internet group that it's called the D Word, and it's actually a very useful resource for people who are thinking of becoming documentary filmmakers. The d-word.com. And it's a wonderful place where people can support each other and learn different things. But anyhow, so he would send these pictures of the shots he was taking in Afghanistan, and we were talking, and we actually were sort of arguing a little bit about lighting and natural light versus putting in lights and so forth. But I will tell you a story, which is that I ran into, just by accident, you talk about, this is not in a foreign country, but I was just met some guy completely by chance, and he told me what he was doing, and it sounded so completely amazing that I decided to start following him. He was trying to open a world-class French restaurant, except it was going to be staffed entirely by people who had just gotten out of prison, because he was a born-again Christian and he thought that this was his mission. And I thought the story was so amazing. I thought this is either going to be a disaster, in which case it would be a great film, or he's going to somehow miraculously make it work, which would also be a great film. I can't lose, so I started shooting. But 6 weeks in, and I was filming it myself, and it took me a long time, and I suddenly realized his kitchen, where all the action is really ugly, the restaurant. And it was too late. By then I'd already shot a lot and I was pulled into the story. But there was just, you could have the greatest cinematographer in the world. You weren't gonna really get incredible shots in that. And I thought, James has all the luck. He's in Afghanistan with these crumbling, beautiful houses and this low winter light coming in and all this stuff. I was really angry. Now I realize it's not an accident. He before he even meets anybody, he's already decided, let's see, it's southern light. In February, the light will be coming in from this direction. The curtains are white. The light will be, not fair.
James is so generous. He starts showing us the footage, early in the day, and I said, "Wow, this is like dust and the light, and you have the ambience light, and from the, and also from reflected from the the sand." And he said, "Oh no, it's not the case." Right? He said, "Yeah." He said, "This sun is the same."
Yeah, well, the sun is the same. I think Pakistan and India maybe have the best light that I've seen. But
that's how he picks the country he's going to work in next. It's not whether they have a war or a social problem. It's whether the curtains are such that the light comes in a nice way.
I'm really picking the countries because of their relevance to U.S. foreign policy.
And their color scheme.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, it helps that people in the Muslim world dress much better than Americans. It's just much, much better. There's just no getting around that. But
meanwhile, I'm in this kitchen with these really terrible fluorescent lights, and it's just a disaster.
I don't actually choose my subjects that just based on how beautiful they are, but I am trying to make films that I think are the most important film I can make at the time, I guess, or the film that's not being made that I think is really important. There's something that I think my audience really needs to know or needs to understand. But if you're making a movie, don't forget that you're making a movie. It's not you're not writing a book. You're not writing a newspaper article. You're making a movie, and it's got to work on the screen. It's got to be something that you can watch and listen to. It's an audiovisual experience, and it's part of it. You can't eliminate that fact from the very beginning. Yeah, I even have an application on my iPad that tells me exactly the angle of the sun at each day of the year, and
I think it's great.
Yeah.
It's that's and that gets back to the question we were also talking about before coming in here, which is about training. Which is if one of you has an opportunity to go and you know, the next time James is making a film, be his assistant for 6 months and help him shoot. You'll learn an incredible amount, and that will be very valuable to you. It's almost a kind of 19th century idea of where you take the person who's been doing it a long time, and you haven't been doing it for such a long time, and you know, that's how Ruby learned editing. That's how I learned producing and directing. You know, there's a wonderful joy actually in watching somebody who's very experienced do work, and I would recommend it, because if you're thinking of starting your own film, it's nice to have watched somebody else make their own mistakes and also do some things really well, and you look at that and you say, boy, I really like that, and then watch them do something and you say, you know, when I get to make my film, I don't want to do that. But then by the time you're making your film, you're in a better position to make choices like that. So I really recommend that to you.
Right, and there's another thing, which is, you know, it's simply a fact that many documentary filmmakers make films because they're really enchanted with the subject, or they think, well, a particular subject is really important and this needs to be told, and they forget that it's a movie. And so they approach it, you know, like a print journalist or something like that. But you really, if you're going to make a documentary, just don't forget that it's a film, and you know, it has to exist in the film medium. Yeah.
And that there are an awful lot of different things to learn, and you know, there's always the phenomenon, just as there was, you know, Orson Welles or Bernardo Bertolucci, who somehow at 22 years old just completely knew how to do everything. But those are the exception. You know, that most people really need to spend some time learning, and there are a lot of different things to learn. Another
4 hours.
What?
Orson Welles. He was a theater guy in radio drama.
Yeah.
He didn't know anything about filmmaking.
Right.
And, you know, he had this idea for a film. He became famous because of all of his antics before Citizen Kane. Hollywood's always looking for talent, so they pulled in Orson Welles. He didn't know anything about filmmaking. And he has this brilliant cinematographer, Greg Toland. And Greg Toland was like, listen, there's nothing to it. I'll teach you all that you need to know about filmmaking in 4 hours.
Oh, I know that's right. Well, if Orson Welles told the story, it might be true and it might not be true, because he was a guy who loved good stories. But that actually raises another interesting point. So if we're thinking about, you know, is film an individual work, or is it a collaborative thing? Now, James is actually an example of somebody who you know, shoots himself, produces, directs, shoots, does a lot of the editing, does some music composition. So he's at the one end of the spectrum where, you know, he's really very much of a solo guy. But even he wants and needs collaborators, because it's such a huge logistical task. And so my own
You get
belief,
lonely by yourself.
What?
Yeah. You just get lonely by yourself.
You get lonely, and it's useful after you've got a lot of material to bring in a different person to look at it and say, you know, this is what you think you got, but let me see, you know, I'm seeing this. Were you aware of this? And it's very, it's a huge undertaking. It's exhausting. It's lonely, and collaboration can be really fun. Where I was going with that was that, you know, Orson Welles, how many of you know Orson Welles' films? How many of you have seen his films? But he's like, he's one of those people that's one of the 5 or 10 people that everybody agrees was a total film genius. And yet, if you look at Citizen Kane, actually, he had an unbelievable cinematographer, the greatest cinematographer of his generation, working with him. He had a co-scriptwriter for Citizen Kane, who was a nasty, difficult, but brilliant guy, Herman Mankiewicz. And then he had his producer, John Houseman, who was kind of keeping Orson Welles out of trouble. So in fact, even in the case of this like boy genius who at 24 did this unbelievable film, he had a lot of support. And so it's worth also thinking about what support you need. And I don't believe most people cannot be good at all aspects of film craft, which is to say the journalistic side, the producing, the organization, the fundraising, the technology of cinematography, the craft of editing, the music. Very few people are good at all of those things. If you're good at 3 of them, that's pretty damn good. So you're going to need also support. And one of the important things is to know what you're not good at and seek out the help where you're weak.
Oh, thank you.
We all have weakness.
Question? Can take a next question. Wow. Maybe.
Hi, my name is Veronica. I was just wondering, earlier in the evening you were speaking about becoming friends with people and whether or not to take advantage of that trust, I guess. And I was just wondering, what has the process of informed consent been for some of the films you've done? I imagine in a lot of places it's just verbal, but has there ever been situations where you also might show some of the main characters the footage that you intend to use before it hits the big screen? So just a bit about informed consent.
Sometimes you're kind of in a situation where you can't really show a lot of, like when I was in the Gaza Strip, I didn't have, I just had a camera and I could show people things on the viewer of the camera, but that was it. You couldn't really roll through all of the footage with them, and the editing was all done back in New York City. So, and no one had a phone, among the subjects. Sometimes it's tricky to do that. Other times, in the case of Afghanistan, I would teachers and people from the school, kids would come over and we'd look at stuff that I'd shot. Just so they really have an idea of what I was really doing. Because for many of them, these kids who grew up in post-Taliban Afghanistan, they've actually never seen a movie in a movie theater. And not only do they not understand exactly what I've shot of them, but they don't really understand how film works necessarily. Except for what they see on TV of Indian movies, and it's not really the same thing. So. I try to do that as much as possible because also in that kind of situation it helps you. Not only is it kind of honest with them in a way, but it also helps you to dispel a lot of the mystery around filmmaking and let them really understand better what you're doing. And so in the process, it can help you have a better relationship with them and have more trust with them to show them what you're doing, especially if you're not doing an investigative journalist type piece where you're really just trying to make, trying to build this world, the cinematic world that these characters inhabit. It's and you're not, there's no real conflict. I mean, I'm not trying to create a scandal about these, the school or the people in it. You know what I mean? I don't have any problem with them. I'm making the film because I like them, and so it's really easy for me in that situation to show material, and they look at it and they say, "Wow, I look pretty good." But there in Afghanistan, there isn't any releases, and people just it's not part of the local law, privacy laws or anything. So the rules are different in Afghanistan than they are in the United States. And I think the main thing is to go with the local culture and the local rules. Social rules. So, if you're in a place where you need to have pieces of paper from everybody, and if you feel like, you might get sued by the subject or something, maybe, for whatever reason, you have to go with the flow and do the right thing in at the time, I guess. I mean, it's a judgment call in the end, but it can be really useful to let people know exactly what you're doing. The downside is everybody's a filmmaker, right? So everybody's a director, and so if you start to show people things, they might start to have opinions about it and say, well, I really don't think you should use that, and and so on, and then it could become problematic.
Can I just? I'm going to answer your question, but first I want to just tell you a very quick story, which is this film that I was doing about religious ritual and prayer. So there was a very important scene that we wanted to film in Ethiopia, and this was an exception where we couldn't find there was actually one great filmmaker in Ethiopia, but he was busy, so we hired an American filmmaker and we sent him into Ethiopia, but we teamed him up with a very able producer who was Ethiopian. And they went, and the assignment I had given them was that they had to find one of these elderly pilgrims who makes his way to Lalibela, which is the most sacred place in Ethiopia, and a tradition that you do in Ethiopia. It's sort of as you're getting very old and maybe thinking about death, you make a journey to Lalibela. But the requirement was, of course, that they had to give consent. And in some cases, literacy levels aren't high, and we don't have a form that's written in Amharic, so some of that. So, and they have to give consent on multiple levels, that they understand they're being filmed, and they understand that we have the right to edit the film, and that we can show the film on television, we can show the film on the internet, the standard kinds of consent that people give. So my American cinematographer, they find this wonderful pilgrim, and the producer, who is very, very able, starts interviewing him. And my cinematographer colleague is filming the pilgrim. And the producer asks him a whole bunch of questions, and he talks a lot, and she talks a lot, and they talk for about 45 minutes. And so, but the producer the filmmaker, the cinematographer doesn't speak Amharic, so he has no idea what they're being said. So after about 45 minutes, he says, "Okay, I'm getting a little tired. Let's take a little break. So how you doing? Did you get great stuff? Did he tell you everything you wanted to know?" And she said, "Oh no, we haven't started yet." He said, "What? We've been shooting for 45 minutes." She said, "No. I've been trying to explain to him what the internet is." So that he could give informed consent about the internet. Anyway, the thing about consent is a funny thing, because this goes back to what I was saying about people are flattered by a presence of a camera, and so they will often tell you things that may not be in their interest to do so, and they will also, in my experience, they will sign anything you put in front of them. And it's terrible, because they don't know what they're signing. But from a legal point of view, once they've signed it, you've got a page of stuff that says I can edit it however I feel fit, and I can sell it to whomever I want, and I can put it on, and you have nothing to say about it. And once that person has signed that, pretty much their claims on you are non-existent. So I believe there's an ethical responsibility to consent that goes larger than just getting somebody to sign a form, and I think it's a very difficult thing to do, because the power tends to be with the filmmaker and tends to be advantageous to the filmmaker and disadvantageous to the subject.
Okay.
Well, in Hong Kong, it's a lot of young journalists know that they don't want to sign anything, or they don't want. So the opposite exists. And also, of course, in China, we have experienced that it doesn't mean anything when you sign that piece of paper. They say, well, I don't want this shot to be, they try many ways to stop the film being, shown. So you really have to negotiate. You really, you have to be very, be ready for anything to happen, a disaster, or, so just the most important thing is really having the trust, or you have in China, in case of China, you have the authority, bless your project.
In my case, I've actually never had anyone sign a consent form in any of my films. And I mean, the first thing is, really it's a local law thing, and the first thing that applies is the local law, and there just isn't. In Afghanistan, there isn't any law that regulates this kind of thing. And in Iraq, when I started filming there was no government. The government had been overthrown. And it really is, it's about trust. It's about, do they trust you filming them, or do they not? And that will determine whether you can do it. And the fact that you're able to film someone for years and years and they don't object generally is taken to mean that they consent to be in your movie.
Yeah, may I do some questions from this side?
Hi, I'm Kylie. I would like to ask about the communication between the filmmaker and their subjects. So have you ever received any complaints that your subject feel they are being used or exploited only after the film is released? And how could you deal with such complaints? Thank you.
Well,
Ruby and I were terrorized by a person who
one
was
person who's in the film for years. Actually,
it's
as
just
of
terrible.
now, she still complain about how the film have ruined her life and her NGO, and it just you cannot make someone happy in some situation. So. You just do the best you could and make the best film, and with the right, we ethically we did the right thing, and it's for the kids, and we didn't take money or we didn't do it for anything else, but our goal was to help the kids who were doing HIV/AIDS awareness in China. So I think that's back to the ethical.
Right, but that there's no guarantee that you're going to make everybody happy all the time. In fact, there's pretty much certainty that somebody will not be happy, and you have to be at peace with what you did, and because it was terrible. Because this person also had an influence in China, and Ruby was living in China, and this person it was very scary actually because she was really so angry at Ruby and me, and hurt our reputation, and in a country where I felt I was worried about Ruby, that she was vulnerable. It was a terrible, terrible experience, but there was nothing we could do to make that person feel better.
Another question? Yeah.
It's a long way down.
Hi, my name is Sharon, and thank you for sharing your insight. My question is, when you make a film, do you have the impact that you want to make in mind? And if you do have an impact, then do you think of a target audience as to how to make the greatest impact?
Do you want to go for them?
Well, I always imagine an audience, I guess, when I'm making a film. I mean, I don't really have a necessarily super clear picture of exactly what they look like sitting out there, watching the movie. But I kind of have this idea that, in my case, I'm making films in a foreign language. They should be someone who can read subtitles, and someone who likes movies, I guess. But I mean, you're making a film. In the end, I'm making a film that I want to see in a movie theater. I'm trying to make the film that I would like to pay money to go see in a movie theater, and that I wish everyone were seeing in a movie theater. That's what I'm setting out to do. Also, in documentaries, sometimes you get this feeling like maybe really the appropriate audience to be thinking about is not the audience now, but the audience of the future. It's kind of more exciting, right? Think about the audience 50 years from now. After all, it's a documentary. It's like a document, right? It sits around on a shelf somewhere, Library of Congress, 35 millimeter reel. It's going to last for 100 years, and by that time they're going to have some even more longevity, long-lasting medium on which you can transfer this film. So if you do it well enough and you make a film which is kind of viewed as something which should be preserved and should be archived and should be transferred from one medium to another, maybe your audience, your primary audience, hasn't even been born yet. I like to think about that.
Can I answer it? I think that's a great way to think, and I think that it's and that's, I think, goes back to what James was talking about ambition. That's an enormously ambitious idea to say, I want a film that people are going to look for 50 years from now, and I think that's a wonderful goal to set for oneself. Nowadays, when we raise money, there is a tendency among people who are giving money, whether that's a foundation or maybe a rich individual who says that, well, Afghanistan, it's important that Afghanistan be better understood, so I'm going to support James Longley's film, and so forth. But that person will very frequently now ask for a statement of planned impact. And I am very ambivalent about this practice, but it is becoming extremely common. And so when you apply to a foundation about, as we did, for example, with the Gates Foundation was very important in enabling us to work in China. They wanted, here's the audiences you're going to reach. Here's the number of thought leaders. So I hate that expression, thought leader. Influentials, that's another really horrible term. But here are the thought leaders and the influentials that you're going to reach and how you're going to impact policy. And then you're going to be capacity building on NGOs. There's a whole kind of vocabulary of this stuff. And I think some of it is very problematic because it forces you in thinking strategically and in alliances with groups, as opposed to, I really think that the fundamental job of a documentary filmmaker is to be pretty solitary and to just try to find the truth best they know it. And that is not generally, it's not generally such a great idea to have 10 different alliances with 16 different organizations, because at that point you're less free to just find the story as you want to find it. But the question of impact is one that people are trying to make measured, and money is flowing to people who can promise impact.
Yeah, now in the internet world, they have this thing called key opinion leaders, this kind of thing. Anyway, another question, this gentleman here.
Yeah, just to follow up on that point, because I think it's interesting.
Your name, please, sir?
Oh, sorry, Christian.
Christian. Oh, sure. That idea of a statement of planned impact, that before you even go shoot something, you have to have an idea of sort of what that future impact will be. Does that detract from the actual on location sort of restructuring, of what your film is going to become? Is it possible to even know in advance what that impact could be? And also, is there any legal obligation for you to let's say you don't hit all those points, can your donor hold you responsible for that as well? I don't know.
I think the biggest danger is that it can start making you think institutionally rather than thinking creatively and journalistically. It's a very different mindset. When you're in partnership with 3 different organizations, are you still really just trying to find the story, or are you trying to please different partners? I understand why people are doing that, because they're saying to themselves, I have money to give out, and I want to invest that where it's going to produce results. I think that there's a certain kind of advocacy film where I still don't even think with an advocacy film you can really promise that kind of impact, but you can be perhaps more likely to do it. But in my opinion, the best documentary film is free of those kinds of calculations. But I'm not sure that I'm in a majority. I probably am in a majority on this thing, but there are a lot of documentary filmmakers who really have bought into the idea that their job is to produce measurable change.
Right. I think there are a lot of ideas that a lot of documentary filmmakers and people who fund documentaries and foundations that support documentaries have bought into that are just plain wrong. But that's kind of another. That would be one of them. Well, yeah, I think the whole idea of let's be able to measure everything. Let's measure impact. I don't think you can measure impact. I mean, you can measure clicks. You can measure ticket sales. You can, but you can't measure the impact of a film. You can't measure it. And, it's just that the people who are funding documentaries now, they're all these as I call them, the new Medicis. They're these billionaires, these people from the business class who got to where they are, and they are now in a position to fund documentaries because they think like that, because they're business people who are always measuring the impact of things, and it's always measured in money. And, that's just a mistake, because the whole point of films isn't about money and business and that kind of stuff. It's the whole point of films is films are films are in your mind. It's not related to money. Money is also in your mind. Money is this imaginary thing, but it's separate from what films do.
But one very important thing to think about if you are contemplating a career as a documentary filmmaker is the fact that despite all the advances in technology, despite the fact that cameras have dropped enormously in price, that editing systems have dropped enormously in price, despite all of those things, it remains an expensive medium. And the way I think of it is it's almost like becoming an architect. If you want to make a great building, you have to be a great architect, but you also need a great client to make that building, right? Because if you don't have the right client, your ideas are not going to be realized. Unfortunately, as documentary filmmakers, we're always chasing money. It's not like painting or writing poetry. You can't just do it by yourself. You can, but it's exhausting and depleting, and it's not, I think, really realistic. It still costs money. And so that makes you always dependent. And that's actually something to think very hard about, because it is frustrating.
But I think the attitude to take is, is not to be a slave in your mind to the people who are telling you what to do in order to get money from them. You want them to be on their knees, begging you for a chance just to be a part of your project.
And if they're really nice, you'll let them in on it.
Exactly. Because what have they got? All they got is money, this imaginary thing. A lot of people have money. What does it mean? It's nothing. Films are ideas, and that's a lot more interesting and unique.
Yes, it's a very wonderful note that we end this symposium with.